What if the most terrifying empire in modern history had won? What if the Nazis, instead of falling in the rubble of Berlin, raised their flag over London, Moscow, and maybe even New York? This isn't just fantasy. Alternate history forces us to ask, what could have happened? What would the world look like if Adolf Hitler's Third Reich had triumphed? In this video, we take you on a 40-minute journey into a chilling mirror universe, one where the Allies lost World War II, and the world became something very different. To imagine this alternate world, we need a plausible divergence point. Let's start in 1940. In our timeline, Hitler made a critical mistake, halting the attack at Dunkirk. It allowed over 300,000 Allied troops to escape to Britain. But imagine he didn't stop. Imagine the Wehrmacht crushed the British Expeditionary Force, and Britain, isolated and demoralized, was forced to surrender by 1941. Now Germany could turn fully eastward. And what if they succeeded there too? In this version, Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa with better logistics. Harsh winters don't stall his advance, and Stalin is caught completely off guard. Moscow falls in late 1941. The Soviet Union, decapitated and demoralized, crumbles by mid-1942. Germany controls all of continental Europe and most of Russia. Hitler has access to vast oil fields in the Caucasus, Ukraine's grain, and Eastern Europe's industry. The Third Reich is now a superpower. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States watches with horror. Pearl Harbor still happens. But with Britain and the USSR both out of the fight, America stands alone. Would the US fight a global war with no allies? Roosevelt may face enormous domestic pressure to sue for peace. Isolationist sentiments rise again. By 1943, a shaky ceasefire is reached. The Nazis consolidate their empire. Japan controls the Pacific. The Axis holds sway over half the world. This is where the real transformation begins. Not just political, but cultural, economic, and technological. What does daily life look like in the Nazi-controlled world? In Europe, the continent becomes a tightly controlled fascist superstate, Großgermanisches Reich. German becomes the official language in most territories. Non-Aryan cultures are erased. Dissent is punishable by death. The Holocaust never ends. It expands. Millions more die in extermination camps across Eastern Europe and beyond. Education is rewritten. Children are taught obedience to the Führer. Science and media are state-controlled. Art, literature, and film become tools of propaganda. And across the ocean, in America, fear grows. Nazi embassies open in New York and Buenos Aires. The Nazi Reich even launches space missions and jet fighter programs, decades ahead of their time. Would the United States eventually fall to this dark tide? Or would it rise as a hidden beacon of freedom in a world turned gray? Instead of a US-Soviet Cold War, we get something even more volatile, a standoff between Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, both now uneasy allies turned rivals. Nuclear weapons become the next battleground. With German scientists like Werner von Braun and Japan's desperate push for atomic technology, a new arms race ignites. One with no ideological balance, just raw ambition. Spy networks infiltrate both Axis powers and the still-free United States. Resistance movements spring up in occupied France, Poland, and even within Germany itself. The Reich begins to rot from within. Its paranoia, brutality, and corruption pushing it toward slow collapse. But not before reshaping the world. In this dark timeline, the 1960s aren't a time of civil rights and rock and roll. They're years of secret police, surveillance states, and authoritarian dominance. The internet? Never invented. The moon landing? Done by Germans, with a swastika planted in the Sea of Tranquility. But as decades pass, cracks form. Underground movements grow stronger. Free radio stations broadcast hope. Dissent spreads through secret books, whispered ideas, and digital resistance. Technology, even in the hands of tyrants, becomes a double-edged sword. Could the 21st century still become an age of rebellion and rebirth? Would a Second World War, A global resistance finally bring the Nazi empire to its knees? Or would the world adapt to totalitarianism and never look back? Deep within the heart of the Reich, not everyone is loyal. In our alternate timeline, a secret resistance movement grows in the shadows of Berlin. Called the Schwarzer Morgen, or Black Dawn, it's composed of disillusioned German officers, intellectuals, and even former Hitler youth who now see the empire for what it truly is. They distribute banned literature, they sabotage factories, they even risk death to protect those targeted by the regime. But the Gestapo is everywhere. Surveillance drones, biometric checkpoints, voice print recognition, all decades ahead of our timeline. Every whispered word, every unapproved conversation is recorded. Trust is a luxury no one can afford. Still, the spark of rebellion grows. The Reich may have conquered the world, but it has never conquered the human spirit. One day, a young woman named Lena, raised in a Reich school and taught to worship the Führer, discovers her grandfather's hidden diary, filled with stories of the old Germany, of freedom, art, and democracy. It changes everything. She becomes one of Black Dawn's fiercest leaders. While the United States remains officially neutral, Nazi influence seeps in. Through economic leverage, propaganda broadcasts, and proxy governments in Latin America, the Reich expands its reach into the Western Hemisphere. In 1955, the Reich establishes embassies in Brazil and Mexico City, followed by cultural exchange programs, thinly veiled espionage operations. American universities are infiltrated. Scientists defect. Pro-Nazi politicians gain traction, pushing the America First agenda and demanding closer ties with Berlin. President Eisenhower resists, but the pressure mounts. FBI counterintelligence is overwhelmed. By 1960, several states have enacted bans on un-American ideologies, targeting communists, socialists, and even civil rights activists. Black communities, labor unions, and intellectuals become targets, just as they had been in Nazi Germany. But opposition remains. Underground newspapers like the Liberty Ledger and pirate radio stations broadcast out of Canada, exposing the Reich's crimes and reminding Americans what's at stake. In this timeline, Africa is not a continent of independent nations. It's a battlefield. The Nazis revive their colonial ambitions with brutal efficiency. The Congo is turned into a giant work camp. North Africa becomes militarized. German garrisons control cities from Casablanca to Cape Town. What happens to African culture? It's erased, just as in Europe. Indigenous languages are banned. African universities are shut down or converted into indoctrination centers. Nazi racial hierarchies place all Africans at the bottom, used for labor and experimentation. But even here, resistance burns. In the hills of Ethiopia, guerrilla fighters use old Italian warplanes and smuggled weapons to strike Nazi convoys. In Nigeria, poets and professors hold secret salons, teaching banned history and passing on forbidden knowledge to the next generation. The struggle is not only physical, it's cultural, it's spiritual. It's the fight for the soul of a continent. While Germany dominates Europe and Africa, its ally across the world, the Empire of Japan, rules the Pacific with equal brutality. But allies can become rivals. By 1958, tensions rise between the two empires. Japan controls China, Korea, and Southeast Asia. It claims dominance over the Pacific Ocean, while Germany's puppet states in India and Central Asia press from the West. In public, Berlin and Tokyo maintain diplomacy. In private, they build weapons. The Cold War of the Axis begins. Japan develops the first floating cities in the South China Sea, mobile military-industrial complexes. Germany responds by constructing massive air bases in Siberia, deploying orbital observation satellites to monitor Japan's coastlines. The world holds its breath. In secret, Japan begins building its own nuclear arsenal, using uranium from Indonesian mines. Germany, already with atomic weapons since 1950, begins construction of underground bunkers in the Alps and Andes. The uneasy alliance that won the war is crumbling, and the world fears what happens when giants collide. One of the most dramatic changes in this alternate timeline is technological acceleration, but only for the elite. With access to the minds of Einstein, who never escaped, Heisenberg, and von Braun, Nazi Germany becomes a scientific powerhouse. But science is no longer free. It's enslaved. By 1965, Germany has developed jet-powered commercial aircraft, personal surveillance drones, computer systems known as Reich engines running on magnetic tape, a prototype global communication network, the precursor to a Nazi-controlled version of the Internet. But this technology doesn't benefit everyone. Medical breakthroughs are reserved for Aryans. Lifespans in Berlin rise to 90, while disease ravages the ghettos and colonies. Cybernetic enhancements begin, with horrific human testing. Prosthetics become a symbol of Nazi supremacy, not recovery. In schools, children are implanted with learning chips, microsystems that monitor and control thoughts. Technology is not progress, it is power. And in the Reich, it is used to dominate, not liberate. But Earth is not enough. In 1969, the same year America landed on the moon in our timeline, Nazi Germany unveils Project Morgenstern, or Project Morning Star, its own lunar mission. But this moon landing is different. The swastika is planted next to the eagle, not in triumph, but in warning. A broadcast from the moon delivers a message in 10 languages. Today, the Reich reaches beyond the Earth. Tomorrow, we shape the stars. In Berlin, millions cheer. In America, there's silence. But not for long. NASA, weakened and underfunded, partners with defected German scientists and Japanese exiles to form a rogue space program. Based in secret stations in Alaska and Mongolia, they develop new propulsion tech. By 1975, low-orbit satellites from the Allied resistance are broadcasting free information into Europe and Africa. The information war has reached orbit. The stars become a new battleground, one of ideology, identity, and inspiration. In the world of the victorious Nazis, culture doesn't flourish. It calcifies. Books are rewritten, movies are propaganda, music is strictly regulated, jazz is outlawed, blues is banned, rock never exists. Instead, the world listens to approved classical compositions, martial anthems, and state-composed songs praising purity and power. Hollywood becomes a puppet. In occupied Britain, Shakespeare is rewritten to conform with Aryan ideals. American literature is stripped of diversity and dissent. Germanic mythology is taught as truth. Odin replaces Einstein. Propaganda blends fantasy and pseudoscience to convince the youth that their destiny lies in blood and soil. But resistance exists in art too. In secret, jazz clubs operate underground in Paris and Chicago. Poems are passed hand-to-hand in Warsaw. Pirate radio transmits forbidden music from the Andes, powered by windmills and hope. One song, written in secret by a dissident composer in Vienna, becomes the anthem of rebellion across 3 continents. Its title? Der Morgen. Wir no totalitarian regime survives without indoctrinating the next generation, and the Nazi Empire has perfected it. From the moment a child is born, they are registered into a blood purity index. Genetic tests determine future status: leaders, workers, or expendables. By age 3, they're enrolled in state nurseries. At 7, they pledge loyalty to the Führer in daily ceremonies. At 12, they begin combat training, history revisionism, and loyalty testing. The smartest join elite academies that train tomorrow's technocrats and warlords. But not all children comply. Some begin to ask questions. Others hack their education chips with smuggled code from black market resistors. A new underground network emerges, the Kinderflamme. Children of the flame. Young minds raised in darkness who seek light. They use stolen tech, encrypted signals, and courage beyond their years to create an invisible school, a hidden curriculum of truth, art, and resistance. The Reich raised them to be machines, but some chose to be human instead. In 1981, the unthinkable happens. A young resistance pilot named Arif, from the Algerian Free Army, hijacks a Nazi orbital shuttle returning from the moon. His mission is simple: expose the truth to the entire Earth. He redirects the satellite signal system used by the Reich to broadcast state-approved news. For 6 minutes, only 6, the world sees something else. Images of mass graves, footage from extermination camps, testimonies of survivors. The truth of what the Reich has hidden for nearly 40 years. 6 minutes, that's all. Then the signal is lost. Arif is never heard from again, but it's enough. In Berlin, students march. In New Delhi, factories strike. In Sao Paulo, rebels storm a Nazi consulate. Across the world, people rise, not with weapons at first, but with words, with the truth, with rage. The Reich had built its empire on lies. Now the truth burns like fire. By the early 1980s, the Reich still appears invincible. But behind the polished surface, it's crumbling. After Arif's transmission, small acts of defiance spread like wildfire. In Warsaw, a group of underground engineers hacks into the city's power grid, broadcasting resistance messages over loudspeakers in every Nazi government building. In Cairo, guerrilla fighters seize an airfield and use it to airdrop forbidden literature across North Africa. And in Berlin, the heart of the empire, a young woman named Lena, now a leader of the Black Dawn, coordinates the first coordinated insurrection. On the night of October 9, 1982, she leads a mass blackout operation that disables the Reich's entire capital surveillance network for 7 minutes. In those 7 minutes, graffiti appears on every government wall. The Reich is not eternal. It becomes the symbol of a new era. The world watches, breathless, and for the first time, the Nazi elite feels fear. As rebellion spreads across the globe, the Reich's oldest alliance finally collapses. The Japanese Empire, watching the Nazi world slowly destabilize, makes its move. In 1983, Tokyo declares the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere fully independent, severing all economic ties with Berlin. Then, without warning, Japan invades German-held India, citing ideological divergence and strategic necessity. It's the beginning of Axis War I, a massive, brutal, global conflict between the two titans that once ruled the Earth together. Naval battles erupt across the Indian Ocean. Japan bombs German outposts in Myanmar. The Reich retaliates by launching long-range missiles at Tokyo and Okinawa. But both empires are weak from within. Japan's colonies rise in rebellion. Chinese and Korean insurgents reclaim territories by the month. German-occupied Russia explodes in violence, led by neo-Slavic freedom fighters. Even in space, conflict begins. Satellites are destroyed, orbital stations raided, moon bases cut off. The world order is fracturing. Two monsters, once allies, now bleed each other dry. The year is 1985. The old war never truly ended. But now, a new world war begins. One not of conquest, but of liberation. The United States, long a shadow of its former self, reemerges. Led by President Maria Reyes, the first woman and Latina to hold office in this timeline, the U.S. openly supports the global resistance. It arms rebels in Europe, funds uprisings in Africa, and launches its first military operation in decades, Operation Phoenix Flame. American forces land in occupied Norway and are met not with bullets, but cheers. In South America, Nazi-allied regimes are overthrown by democratic coalitions. In North Africa, an army of rebels and former slaves marches toward Cairo, liberating city after city. The resistance has no borders now, it is global. But the Reich will not fall quietly. SS divisions are recalled from Mars, preparation zones. Civilian cities are declared war zones. The Reich begins using neutron bombs, designed to kill humans, not destroy infrastructure. Millions die, but billions fight. The world is burning again, but this time, it's for freedom. In this timeline, Adolf Hitler never died in a bunker in 1945. Instead, he lived until 1964. His death carefully concealed from the public. A synthetic replacement, a body double enhanced by surgery and audio engineering, took his place in broadcasts for 2 more decades. His true death is a secret known only to the Nazi High Council, and his cult of personality endures long after his heart stops beating. But by 1986, the lie begins to crack. Lena and Black Dawn hack into the Reich's secure archive and release hidden footage. Hitler's funeral in 1964, attended in secret by SS generals and high-ranking officials. The footage leaks across the Resistance's global satellite network. The public reels. The Reich lied, again. Across Europe, statues fall. Propaganda posters are torn down. Entire military divisions defect. The death of a myth breaks the spell. Without the shadow of the Führer, the Nazi regime is no longer divine. It's exposed for what it is: mortal, fragile, and crumbling. In the spring of 1987, a coalition of global forces, rebels from the resistance, defected Wehrmacht officers, American and Brazilian troops, and South African freedom fighters, close in on Berlin. The city is surrounded. The final battle of World War II, one that began half a century ago, is about to end. The Reich deploys its final weapon, Project Heimdall, an artificial intelligence command system designed to operate without human emotion. It calculates everything: troop movement, civilian dispensability, optimal fire zones. But even Heimdall can't calculate hope. Inside Berlin, citizens rise up before the enemy even arrives. Explosives are placed inside the Reichstag. Streets are barricaded. Youth militias turn on their commanders. The city erupts in rebellion. When Allied forces breach the wall, they find the SS in retreat, not just militarily, but spiritually. In a symbolic act, Lena walks into the Führer bunker, now used as a command center, and plants a white rose where Hitler once stood. The war is over. Peace, at last. But peace built on ashes. By 1990, the Nazi Empire has collapsed. Japan sues for peace after losing its Pacific territories and a devastating civil revolt in Korea. A global summit is held in Geneva, the World Reformation Council. There are no victors, only survivors. The world must now reckon with the horrors of the Reich. Over 50 million civilians exterminated in camps no one ever saw. Genetically engineered super soldiers who have known nothing but war. Children raised without names, only numbers. New tribunals begin, but they are not enough. Many Nazi officials vanish into the underground. Resistance fighters often take justice into their own hands. And rebuilding? That will take generations. But amid the ruins, something grows. Free newspapers, public schools, elections, and art. Street murals bloom in cities once draped in red and black. Statues of tyrants are replaced with sculptures of dancers, writers, and martyrs. The world is not healed, but it is awake. The old world is gone. The 1990s mark the birth of a new global order, born not out of diplomacy, but trauma. After the fall of the Reich and the collapse of Imperial Japan, territories once under totalitarian control face a question. Do we rebuild the nations that were destroyed, or create something entirely new? Some choose restoration. France reclaims its language, its literature, its soul. Poland elects its first president in 60 years. Korea reunifies after half a century of occupation and war. But many regions choose revolution. The Pan-African Union forms, a coalition of liberated African states that unite around shared culture, security, and memory. No longer colonized, they shape their own destiny. In Eastern Europe, new federations rise from the ruins of old borders. Slovenia, Slovakia, and Belarus create democratic alliances focused on shared healing, not past divisions. And in a bold move, the World Constitution Project begins, an effort to create a global Bill of Rights, ensuring no regime can ever again classify a person's worth by blood or heritage. It's imperfect. Tensions remain. But for the first time in 100 years, the world is writing its own future. What happens when the lights come back on? After decades of suppression, The arts explode in a renaissance unmatched in human history. Books long banned are reprinted. Lost music is performed for the first time in generations. Entire libraries hidden under floorboards or encoded in satellites are finally open to the public. Theaters reopen. Streets are filled with dancers and poets. An entire generation that has never known beauty now drowns in it. Digital archives flood the world, containing images of pre-war art, underground films, lost photographs, and voices silenced for decades. Young people from Nigeria to Norway upload their grandparents' forbidden paintings and poems to global repositories. Entire new genres are born. Reclamation jazz, blending traditional African rhythms with Eastern European chants. Echo lit, stories written as if shouted from the past into the future. Shadow cinema, films created from fragments of state propaganda, recut to reveal hidden truths. Art becomes healing, and remembrance becomes resistance. The world doesn't just rediscover what it lost, it redefines itself. But not everything can be rebuilt. Some scars never fade. Some truths, once uncovered, are too heavy to carry. Mass graves are still being found in Ukraine, in Namibia, in the mountains of Tibet. Entire cities remain haunted by chemical fallout, genetic experiments, or collapsed underground cities where undesirables were erased. And then there are the children of the Reich, now adults. Raised without families, taught to hate, programmed to obey. Many seek forgiveness, but most are broken. Survivors? Yes. But of what? Across the world, truth commissions are formed. Some are legal, some are spiritual, some involve theater, song, and shared silence. They ask, how do we live with what happened? The answer is different in every corner of the earth. But one truth binds all efforts. To forget is to risk repeating. So museums are built not to glorify war, but to confront it. Monuments rise not to generals, but to victims. And in every city, a single phrase is carved into stone. Never again. In our timeline, the internet was born in a free world. In this alternate one, it wasn't. The Reich's network, originally designed as a surveillance and control system called Netzauge, Net-Eye, is repurposed after the war. Reprogrammed by resistance coders, it becomes the foundation for a global internet, faster, more decentralized, and far more fragile. The infrastructure remains, satellites, cables, nodes, but the ideology must be purged. Open-source communities rise everywhere. From the Andes to Armenia, tech hubs flourish, developing encryption protocols, digital identity frameworks, and memory vaults to preserve suppressed history. But the ghosts of Netzauge remain. Old AI programs once used to identify traitors are accidentally reactivated by fringe groups. Deepfake propaganda reemerges in war-torn regions. Former Reich technocrats create black markets of surveillance tools. The line between freedom and control becomes blurred again, not by tanks or flags, but by code. And now the question is no longer, who rules the land? But who rules the data? History has a rhythm, and tyranny has a habit of finding new masks. In the 2000s of this timeline, a new challenge emerges, not from old enemies, but new opportunists. Some nations begin restricting digital freedoms under the banner of security. Others resurrect eugenics in biotech industries, this time marketed as designer genetics or health optimization. Algorithms trained on Reich-era datasets resurface, misused by corporations and governments alike. Conspiracy movements arise, some denying the Reich's crimes, others glorifying them in secret channels. These groups use nostalgia, nationalism, and fear to sway the desperate and disenfranchised. The very tools used to dismantle the Reich risk becoming the tools to rebuild its shadow. And so a new generation must rise, digital activists, philosophers, artists, to challenge tyranny once again. This time, the battlefield isn't in the streets. It's on the screen, in the feed, in the subconscious rhythms of everyday life. The Reich may have fallen, but authoritarianism, like a virus, mutates. The world has been free from Nazi rule for nearly 4 decades, yet the aftershocks continue, in policy, in memory, in the faces of those still searching for ancestors lost. Can there be peace? In Rwanda, a teacher begins every class with a moment of shared breathing, not silence, but presence. In Berlin, a public square is turned into a perpetual debate forum where survivors and descendants speak without fear. In Tokyo, a children's museum tells the story of a world that almost was, a reminder of how close humanity came to erasing itself. Peace, it seems, is not a destination. It's a decision, made again and again. It means vigilance. It means storytelling. It means remembering that every what if is also a warning. And so, across this altered earth, people carry the past not as a chain, but as a torch. Because peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of consciousness. Behind every statistic is a story. In Vilnius, an old woman named Elzbieta walks the ruins of a camp where her brother vanished in 1952. She leaves a violin at the gate, the same instrument he once played for SS guards, just to survive one more day. In Namibia, a farmer named Kwame plants 200 trees, one for every member of his village, erased in the Reich's diamond mines. He names them out loud as he waters each root. In Tokyo, a young mother named Aiko traces her family's rise from imperial privilege to quiet rebellion. Her grandfather once trained kamikaze pilots. Her son now teaches peace studies. And in São Paulo, a filmmaker named Diego creates the first interactive museum of resistance, where visitors step into a survivor's shoes using virtual reality to feel the fear, hope, and heartbreak they lived through. These aren't stories of despair. They are stories of continuance, of what it means to rebuild a life when the world tried to erase your name. One question haunts this alternate world more than any other. How could it happen? How could an entire civilization be consumed by cruelty? Scholars debate in universities rebuilt from ruins. Psychologists write papers on obedience, groupthink, and radicalization. Theologians ask if evil is a human flaw or a system designed to make monsters out of men. In some towns, annual ceremonies are held, not to honor heroes, but to acknowledge complicity. Citizens read the names of neighbors their ancestors betrayed, profited from, or stayed silent about. It is painful, it is messy, but it is necessary. Because without the courage to face darkness, we cannot truly seek light. And this is where alternate history becomes more than fiction. It becomes a mirror. One that asks, what would you have done? Where would you have stood? What would you have risked for someone else? So now, we return to the question we asked at the beginning. What if the Nazis had won the war? What if freedom had fallen? What if tyranny had become normal? What if the greatest atrocities in human history had been amplified, not stopped? We've walked through 100 years of a world twisted by hate, yet held together, again and again, by courage. By those who hid books? We've walked through 100 years of a world twisted by hate, yet held together, again and again, by courage. By those who hid books and floorboards, who whispered truth in the dark, who risked their lives for strangers, because even in the darkest hour they believed in light. In this alternate reality, the Nazis won the war, but they did not win forever. Because no regime, no ideology, no empire, no matter how powerful, can kill the longing inside the human spirit to be free. That longing fuels rebellion. It nurtures art. It sings in silence and speaks through scars. And when passed down across generations, it becomes legacy. Not the legacy of war, but of survival, of resistance. Some may ask, why imagine such horror? Why explore a timeline where the worst people succeeded? Because alternate history isn't about fantasy, it's about fragility. It shows us that the world we know, with all its flaws, could have been far worse. It reminds us that progress isn't guaranteed, that human rights, democracy, and justice are not accidents. They're choices, daily ones. In imagining the loss of these things, we see how precious they are. And we also see something more. that even if evil wins battles, it doesn't win the future, because the future isn't built by those who conquer. It's built by those who endure. We don't live in that world. The Nazis lost, the Allies prevailed, and history unfolded into a different, and far better, reality. But knowing how close we came, how easily it could have changed, that knowledge gives us responsibility. To protect truth, to challenge hate, to speak when others go silent. Because the fight against tyranny doesn't just happen on battlefields, it happens in classrooms, in voting booths, in art, in empathy. So next time you read a history book, see a protest, or vote in an election, remember this timeline. Not because it was real, but because it almost was. And because the world you live in, for all its cracks and chaos, is one that people fought to preserve. Let's never forget that. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history reimagined. If you found this powerful, thought-provoking, or important, share it. Like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What moment in history do you think changed everything? Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay human.